Physically at YISS and online, all the participants, good morning, and I'm glad that we have 100 in total, I think, participants for this session with our guest from NASA astronaut Jeff Williams. I will not waste time by uh, talking about his background, his history, how many days, how many mission. I will let him talk about it and also talk about the space exploration for about 30 minutes, and after that Q&A. Now I will moderate the Q&A, so be nice to me.
Of our audience out there, specifically our online audience. My entire career at NASA has been focused on the International Space Station. And we're going to go through some slides here, right? So we're going to display some slides for the online audience. The International Space Station has been orbiting the Earth since the first element was launched in 1998. We had the first expedition crew launched in 2000. Since the fall of 2000, we've had continuous human presence on board the space station. My entire career consisted of 4 flights in space. The first one was in 2000. The next was in 2006 for a 6-month flight. And then again in 2009 and 2010 for another 6-month flight. And then the most recent one was in 2016, also a 6-month flight. The first flight was on the space shuttle. It was 10 days long. It was early in the assembly of the space station. The second flight was launched on a Russian Soyuz rocket from Kazakhstan. It was about halfway through the building of the space station. And then during the stay in 2009 and 10, we finished the assembly of the space station in 2010. And then the most recent in 2016, the space station is in its full operational mode. We have flown 65, 66 expeditions to the space station over nearly 22 years of continuous human presence. This is the view from the space station, and you never get tired of the view of Earth, which obviously is our home and is very special to us. And it's just a beautiful object. It's the biggest object in space. We're flying in an orbit around the Earth, 400 kilometers or so above the Earth. Let's go to the next slide. Of course, the Earth has fascinated astronauts throughout history. This picture was actually taken during an Apollo flight, where you can see the entire globe of the Earth. And the Apollo astronauts that I have had the opportunity to talk to and get to know, even though it was very fascinating, of course, going to the moon, and those 12 men that walked on the moon have some great stories to tell about that. But everybody's common focus was to look back at the Earth, which is our home and is the most beautiful planet in the solar system for many, many reasons. Next slide. Again, this is the view from the space station. You can see just the beauty of the sun's reflection in the ocean and the cloud formations. Next slide. Okay, the space shuttle was designed in the 1970s, first flight in 1981. Its primary purpose, although it put up lots of satellites and did lots of things in its early years, its primary purpose for existence was to put up a space station. And about 47 space shuttle flights were dedicated to the building of the space station. The space shuttle on the launch pad weighed about 4 million pounds. So it was massive, carried a crew of 7, about 40,000 pounds of payload in the payload bay. Most of that 4 million pounds, though, was fuel to get to orbit. And that fuel fired through the engines produced 7.5 million pounds of thrust at liftoff. And it's the physics of a rocket. It takes less than 9 minutes firing the rocket engines to get to orbit. And after that 9 minutes, 8 minutes and 53 seconds to be exact, on the space shuttle, you're in orbit going 25,000 kilometers per hour, orbiting the Earth every 90 minutes. And I got a short video clip showing a space shuttle launch. And let's make sure we get audio in it as well. 7.5 million pounds of thrust at liftoff. Hopefully we have the audio going out online, but if we don't, it is a tremendous amount of power going out to lift that 4 million pounds. The first 2 minutes burn the solid rocket boosters. Here you see the solid rocket booster being jettisoned and the space shuttle continuing its ascent into orbit and acceleration to that 25,000 kilometers per hour, which is the orbit that the space station is in. The next slide shows the beginning of the building of the space station. And if we can get to the next slide, and we don't need to worry about audio. This was in the fall of 2000, my first flight on the space shuttle. Space station at this point was in its beginning stages, 2 modules, one built in the US by NASA and the other one built in Russia by our Russian partners. The International Space Station is an international partnership. It's made up of NASA, of course, is the lead partner, the integrated partner. Russia is a major partner. Japan is a partner. The European Space Agency is made up of about 12 countries of Western Europe, and Canada is the final partner. So it is international. And I'll talk a little bit later about future international programs. Let's see, next slide. We continued to build it starting in 1998, as I said, and over the following years added one piece at a time. And here you see when it was about 1/3 of the way built in terms of its size, and Expedition 1 launched and started its long-term stay on the International Space Station. And since then, this was in November of 2000, since then we've had continuous human presence in space from all of the countries I mentioned before. Next slide. This is what it looked like when it was about halfway through, and my second visit there, my first 6-month flight, with the beautiful Earth in the background. The wings on the top of the picture there are solar arrays, and solar arrays are used to collect the sun's energy to charge the batteries that are then discharged when we're on the night side of the Earth. And of course, the solar arrays are powering all of the equipment necessary to operate the space station, from the computer systems to the pumps in the thermal systems to the electrical power to experimental modules to the ventilation fans and all of the equipment necessary to keep the space station operating. So it takes a lot of energy. Over the building of the space station, we kept adding solar arrays, and next slide will show that, as well as modules. So we increased the laboratory capacity on the inside, and increased the building step by step to add different solar arrays. This was in about 2007, I think it was, or so. And next slide shows a little bit later in the assembly, adding more solar arrays. And then and look in the background there, you see the mountains. I believe these are the mountains of the Himalayas. And you say, how were these pictures taken? They were typically taken, most of these pictures were taken from the space shuttle after the space shuttle had brought up a component, docked to the space station, attached that component to continue the assembly, and then undocked to return to Earth. And as it was drifting away, we assigned the task to the crew to take as many pictures as possible of the space station, and this is one of them. Next slide shows its final assembly. If you could lay the space station on the ground, it's bigger than a football field. If you could put it on a scale and weigh it now, it's almost 1 million pounds mass. So it's huge. It's the most significant, complicated technological achievement in the history of humanity. When you consider the technical complexity of the space station, when you consider the size of the space station, when you consider the geopolitical complexity, just launching it from many countries in different parts of the Earth and integrating it on board or on orbit, it's complex in that way. and it continues to operate. Again, continuous human presence for going on 22 years in this international partnership. Look in the background of this picture, it's pretty amazing too. I'll just point it out. The blue arc in the background is the atmosphere of the Earth. So below that arc is the Earth itself, the sphere of the Earth, and it illustrates how relatively thin, relative to the diameter of the Earth, our atmosphere is, which of course, the water cycle, the air, atmosphere is key to provide for life support here on Earth. Next slide. One of the highlights of the entire experience is doing a spacewalk, and this was one of 5 spacewalks I had the privilege to do during my career. It's one thing to be inside the space station, look out the window and see the star field and the majesty out in the star field and the Earth below and all of the details of the Earth. It's quite another thing to go out through the airlock and out the hatch, and then you're hand over hand grabbing on the handrails on the outside and climbing around the outside of the space station and seeing the space station from the outside and the Earth in the background. Just an amazing, amazing experience. It's the most challenging thing we do in space flight, both physically and mentally. Each spacewalk lasts about 7 hours. Obviously, it's difficult to work in a spacesuit like this. It's trying to, putting a thread through a needle with ski gloves on or something, and plus the gloves, the suit is pressurized, so you're working against the pressure of the suit with every finger motion, every arm motion, every hand motion. And we're outside for about 7 hours, so it's a very long day. To date, there have been on the order of, I don't know the exact number, but on the order of 230 spacewalks done in the history of building the space station and then sustaining it since we began. But it's definitely a highlight of the experience. Next slide. We were doing selfies before anybody knew the term selfie. If you look close at this picture, let me describe it to you. The helmet that we're wearing is convex. And right here in the middle of the picture here, you see the black small circle. That's the objective lens of a Nikon professional grade camera, wrapped in a white thermal blanket to protect it from the extreme temperatures of outside. And so I'm holding the camera out and pointing it at the visor of the spacesuit, which is very reflective. And in the reflection on the visor, you can see shoulders, the patches on the shoulders, the U.S. flag here, and a patch that we have for the Spacewalk organization. And then you see off in the distance, you see the structure of the space station. Because we have this convex shaped visor, it's distorted accordingly. And then behind that, the globe of the Earth. So one of my favorite pictures, just to bring back the memory of that experience. Next slide. This is a very unique opportunity, a unique view. This happens to be a supply ship that was launched, I believe this one was launched from Florida, and it was launched right after we had passed over it. So looking back from the space station, looking behind us, the lighting conditions were perfect enough so that the plume of the rocket was illuminated by the sun's light, and able to grab this picture. So there you see the trajectory of the rocket leaving the Earth, coming up through the atmosphere, and then turning to fly parallel with the Earth's surface, getting into that orbit, accelerating to that 25,000 miles or kilometers per hour that it takes to stay in Earth orbit, and then after that, orbiting the Earth every 90 minutes. Next slide. As I said, the Russians are a major partner. They have contributed many rocket launches. This was a Soyuz launch, which we've been rotating expeditionary crews to the space station since the beginning, since Expedition 1. And I launched 3 times on a Russian Soyuz. Next slide. And next one. And here we have just a short video of the Soyuz rocket, was a space shuttle carried a crew of 7 and about 40,000 pounds of payload. The Soyuz is smaller, carries a crew of 3 and maybe 100 or 150 kilograms of payload. We launch from central Kazakhstan at a facility called the Baikonur Cosmodrome. And it is the place that was developed way back in the beginning of the space race, started in the late 1950s, early 1960s, and we launched from the same launch pad that Yuri Gagarin launched from, the first man in space at the beginning of the space race between the US and the Soviet Union. Let's go on to the next slide. This is a return to Earth on the Soyuz. I'll give you just a few shots of that. So we're going at that 25,000 kilometers per hour. I'm used to saying 17,500 miles per hour, but 25,000 kilometers per hour. To slow down, we use the friction of the Earth atmosphere to re-enter and slow us down using that friction. That means we'll re-enter the atmosphere in a in a fireball, and we feel 4 times the force of gravity. And after we go through that major re-entry portion of the return, then the parachute opens. This is over central Kazakhstan, and then we drift down for about 10 minutes under parachute. Next slide is approaching the ground. You can see the shadow of the spacecraft there, not too far, just down and to the left of the capsule. So we're just about to impact the ground. And the next slide shows the ignition of what we call soft landing thrusters to slow us down just a little bit more before we impact the ground. Next slide is the actual impact. And I liken it as if you go through a car wreck, only it's designed to protect the crew so that we can get through it without being injured. And then the next slide shows search and rescue forces, shows the capsule there after reentry. You can see the charring on the outside from coming through that high temperature fireball. The thermal protection shield on the outside of the capsule protects us on the inside. And there's search and rescue forces out there to retrieve us out of the capsule and then return home. Next slide. That's the, in a nutshell, a very short summary of the history of the International Space Station, a history that continues to unfold in this international partnership. And it has the primary objective of not only being a laboratory to do various science research, but also to develop the technology that is required to move on to the next program. And the next program will be going back to the moon and to establish a little bit more of a semi-permanent operation on the moon, not just go and visit and come back, but we're going to build a small space station that'll be orbiting the moon, and we're going to have more extensive exploration on the surface of the moon as well. And all of that, in terms of developing that operation and that infrastructure and that capability, will be done in an international partnership, and that'll prepare the world also for the next great objective, which hopefully has a chance to occur in your lifetime, and that is to send a crew to Mars, which has always been a focus of mankind since the middle of the 20th century. By the way, the next program is called the Artemis program. In Greek mythology, Artemis was a sister to Apollo, so that's where they got the name. Of course, the Apollo missions took us to the moon. 12 men walked on the moon. Artemis will be the next lunar program. It'll be an international program. And you may not know that Singapore signed up to be part of the Artemis program here back in April. So there will be some contribution that Singapore, along with many other nations around the world, will have the opportunity to make for that next chapter of space exploration, that next chapter which is being directly supported by the ongoing operation of the International Space Station. So with that, Professor Neal, I'm ready for any questions that we might have.
Okay, I think a very short introduction to the International Space Station, and
will like to invoke this 101 questions. Is it?
You've got the hard job of prioritizing them. I got the easy job.
Okay, I will start with a very simple one, which I'm using Wi-Fi. Is there Wi-Fi in ISS? And anyway, who think there's Wi-Fi in ISS? Hands up. And on the line, you can thumbs up too. All right. Okay.
We have a few people here that believe there's Wi-Fi on ISS. That's a capability actually that we've developed over the years. Early on in the ISS program, when I was first there, we could talk with the equivalent of a radio communication to the mission control centers, but we could only do it about half the time we were up there. Every orbit, of course, we're dependent upon as we go around the Earth. We have satellites in geosynchronous orbit, several of them, and we use 3 or 4 of them typically in different places over the Earth. So as we go around the Earth, we have receivers and transmitters on the space station that transmit and receive signals from these geosynchronous satellites. So we had voice communication and we could send data down, but it wasn't like Wi-Fi, it wasn't internet. But then later we added Wi-Fi on board the International Space Station. We also added more communication channels that enabled us to eventually tie in to the internet. So in my stay in 2009 and 2010, I think it was in February of 2010, we got the access for the first time to the internet, and I was able to send the first tweet from the ISS. And since then, we've added more bandwidth, more capability, and I think actually too much, because we can all waste too much time on the internet if we have access to it. But we have direct access, and my last flight I had social media accounts on Twitter, on Facebook, and Instagram is all showing primarily the pictures and examples of pictures from there.
All right, so you have social media in space, right? Okay, good. Next question is very pertinent to us, right? I mean, in fact, the whole world, right? It's a very simple question. Just like 4 words or 5 words. Is there COVID in space?
Is there COVID in space? Well, COVID it's actually an acronym, right? And it stands for coronavirus. And coronavirus, a type of virus, there's always been those viruses that have existed. The common flu is that type of virus, as I understand it. There are other viruses that don't directly impact humans. So viruses are common continually all the time. It's just that what we know as COVID was a particularly virulent one that produced a very significant problem for the world. That's not the first time in history it's happened, and it's probably, unfortunately, not the last time in history that's happened. So there are viruses. Because we send people to space, viruses go to space as well, but we've had no issues with this current pandemic type COVID virus. Okay. And the reason is because we go into quarantine and we have very strict controls to control people before they launch, to protect people before they launch. So it's something we've always had. We put people in quarantine before launch throughout the history of the space program for that reason.
How many days quarantine?
It's about 12 days now.
All right, okay. So you think you have 7 days is a lot? No. Okay, right. The next question is more personal. You have the record of having the second longest time in space. And as an American, did you have any trouble adjusting when you came back to Earth?
There's adjustment going there that takes a few weeks to adapt, but it's mostly you feel clumsy and working in a weightless environment. You're losing things all the time. So there's an adaptation going there. But the most significant adaptation is actually coming back. Because even though we exercise every day up there to maintain our muscle strength and our bone strength, your vestibular system, your sense of balance isn't working because you're in a weightless environment. So your brain stops even paying attention to your vestibular system. And even though we exercise every day, we can't isolate every muscle. So there are many muscles that don't get exercised up there, especially the smaller muscles that, for example, support your spine, every vertebrae in your spine. But they're hard to isolate. It's easy to exercise the big muscles, but not the small muscles. So when you come back after 6 months, it's a huge adjustment to come back and get accustomed again to what I call the relentless force of gravity. At first, when you land, that first moment after touchdown, you feel like the earth is a big giant magnet sucking you into it, and it's very difficult to even pick up your arm. And then when you stand up, it's almost impossible to maintain your balance other than just using your visual cues and working really hard to maintain your balance, to be able to stand up without falling down. You can't stand up in the dark or with your eyes closed and maintain your balance when you first come back. You adjust very quickly, I would say days or maybe up to 10 days to regain your balance and your vestibular senses. But it can take 6 weeks to working with a trainer every day in the gym to readapt in terms of your muscles, your flexibility, your coordination.
Which means you have to go to gym in space.
We go to the gym every day in space. We have a treadmill. So I would run on a treadmill 30 minutes or so every day. And you think, okay, how do I run on a treadmill in a weightless environment? Well, we wear a harness and we have bungees to pull us down into the treadmill. So it's actually a great workout. It's a hard workout because you're pulling so hard on your shoulders. So it'd be like running with a big backpack on, with a heavy backpack. And then we also have, we do a weightlifting workout every day as well. And you say, well, it's weightless. How do you do weightlifting? Well, we don't obviously lift weights, but we have a machine that uses vacuum cylinders to produce the weight, to produce the loading, the resistance. And we do lots of different exercises. So a couple of examples, key exercises would be body squats or deadlifts, which use our big muscles, our full body muscles, our core muscles, from our legs on up to the central core of our body. So those are very valuable exercises to use. And as I said, we exercise up there every day.
Good. And somebody want to go to space, so they're asking, can they be invited to be an astronaut?
It's hard to be invited to be an astronaut. You have to apply. You have to dedicate yourself to it in life. One, it's the folks that have an interest in math and science and technology early in life that then grow those interests in their academics and their studies, and then maybe go into a field that's I would call operational. That's why there's so many military pilots that are astronauts. But you don't have to be in the military. You can be an engineer or a scientist, or in America, even many medical doctors, for example, have become astronauts. But you have to work hard in your field, do really well in your studies, do really well in the jobs that you have, get some operational hands-on experience, and then you have to apply. And I try to encourage young people, to use it myself as an illustration, to persevere in life and figure out what your interests are, and then feed those interests, and those interests will become passions, and then work hard to study and prepare yourself in those areas and take advantage of opportunities that you get, and set goals that are beyond what you currently have available to you. Set a goal over the horizon and work hard toward that goal. And if you suffer disappointments in trying to achieve the goal, don't be discouraged by the disappointments. Just continue to press on. I applied to be an astronaut over 10 years, and I aspired to be an astronaut well over 20 years, or almost 20 years. After applying for 10 years, 6 applications, interviewing with NASA 3 times before they finally selected me in 1996. So it's not easy to do. Many things in life are not easy to do. But if I encourage you to set your goals, whatever they are, and work hard toward them, and don't give up when you suffer disappointments.
Okay, for the next question is for me. Now, okay, so the question is generally about, is pursuing a career in the field of space possible for people in Singapore? Now, we don't have a space mission. Maybe in future we might have, but generally what we have right now is satellites design, engineering. So there are lots of things in this field. We've local university, NUS, NTU have launched satellites. A local company like ST Engineering launched satellites. So those are our participation in space. We have a new agency called the Office of Space Technology, Austin, in part of EDB. You can research about it, and they are coming up with exciting programs. You just have to look out for it. We have signed up with Artemis, and Artemis is the mission to moon, and there might be something interesting. I know of a guy who is undergrad, first year undergrad, called Jared, and he wrote comics, and NASA gave him a contract. There's the first Singaporean contract from NASA to actually produce comics for education. So yeah, there are many ways of participating. Just need to aspire, and then of course perspire. Well, next question. Let's talk about expedition. And the question is very specific. How is the training like to become an astronaut? And what kind of preparations do you undergo before each mission? So maybe you can choose one mission, how long to train, and it's like, hey, I train today, tomorrow I go up in a rocket, or what?
Yeah, some people think we just sit around on the ground waiting for the rocket launch and then go and do what we do, but that's not true. And I'll use the example of the 2006 flight, which was my first 6-month flight on to the International Space Station. Second flight and second time in space. First time launching on a Russian Soyuz. And I trained for almost 4 years for that flight, just dedicated to that flight. If you think about it, you have to learn how to operate the space station. You have to learn how to function on the space station. So you learn all of the systems of the space station, how they operate, how you have to do maintenance to maintain the systems on the station. When things fail, we have spare parts, we have procedures. It's designed to be able to be repairable, so you have to learn how to do all the maintenance. You can't call the plumber or the electrician or even the doctor, when you're up there if you need some kind of help. So you have to train to do all of that. Speaking of doctors, we go through medical training as well. So I've spent a lot of time in classroom environment learning medical procedures, as well as hospitals in Houston, to include the trauma center downtown, and operating rooms, learning medical procedures. Even learning how to pull teeth in the dental school, which I never would want to do, and thankfully didn't have to. But then also I talked about launching either on the space shuttle or the Soyuz. You have to learn that. So you have to learn the systems of the Soyuz in that case. And in Russia, the team in Russia, they don't speak English. The cosmonauts learn English. We learn Russian. So the hardest part of my preparation in those early years was the Russian language, because we use both languages. So that's a big part of the preparation. So even now, I have one Russian lesson every week, typically 2-hour equivalent to a Zoom call with my instructor, and continue with my Russian, because I'm still working with our Russian partners on a regular basis. You have to learn how to deal with any emergencies that come up. So that takes a lot of training. You have to go through all of the training for spacewalks, and we use a large swimming pool, one of the largest pools that I know of in the world, that we use to put a mock-up of the space station on the bottom, and then we go down underwater, and you can weigh yourself out so that you're neutrally buoyant in the water, and it simulates a weightless environment, and you learn how to work in that suit. In the picture I showed earlier, you learn how to operate the suit, you have to learn how to maintain the suit, how to put it together. Each one of them is custom fit for you. So you have to do a lot of maintenance and repairs of the suits themselves on board. And then you have to learn how to operate effectively outside when you're out there. So that takes a lot of training. I think I have 605 almost 700 hours underwater just for spacewalk training. And then it's a laboratory, and we work in different science areas across the whole spectrum, all the science disciplines that you might be exposed to. We do experiments in those science disciplines. So we have to go through training to prepare us for that, to be able to execute those experiments. Maybe we don't become experts in each of those fields, but we train to the level as if you're a laboratory technician executing the experiments for the teams that are represented on the ground for each of them. So those are just a few examples, and there's many other topics as well.
Okay, this question is personal. So you're 6 months away. So how do you maintain contact with your family and with Emily, your wife here?
Very important. Just to maintain your morale, of course, it's important for all of us to have contact with those people that we love. Our family is central to that. Of course, then we have friends and other people that we want to maintain contact with. And NASA was very good right from the beginning to recognize the importance of that, just for the morale of the crew, the effectiveness of the crew. So Emily and I typically would talk at least twice every day. I could call her from the space station, so we would check in. We had a group of folks on the ground that would provide her assistance with things, issues that came up in life, so I could call on them to help her out when need be. Once a week, usually on a Sunday afternoon, we would have a two-way video call. And this was before Zoom, before all of the things that we have nowadays, but we would have a two-way video call. They would put a big machine in our house, and that was very special, especially for me, because she could see a lot of video that went down, because we send a lot of video down, but I couldn't see her on the ground except for those two-way video calls on Sunday afternoon. And nowadays, of course, we have, we've always had email, but we have even more contact now with access to the internet. We got internet, as I said earlier, for the first time in 2010. I talked about that tweet. Sometimes I get a question, what's the first thing you did on the internet? And my answer is very obvious in what I actually did. I said, well, I ordered my wife flowers.
Wow. Something that my wife keep complaining about me. All right, let's move away from flowers. Let's talk about food then, much more exciting. We love durian. You love durian? Yes? Should we try durian? Now it's in season. Yeah, okay. All right, how do you eat and drink in the space station? Is the water solid ice because it's so cold or whatever?
Well, we have, of course, we have lots of water. Everybody requires water, and we can mix in the water, fruit, drinks, coffee, tea. So we have a good variety of drinks, and they come in bags, and we just inject the water into the bag. It might be hot water, it might be ambient water. We don't have really cold water, but we have ambient water and hot. So every morning I would make myself a coffee, a bag of coffee, and then you drink it out of a straw because you're in a weightless environment. The food that we have is actually pretty good. It's much better than you might expect. Much of it is dehydrated, and it comes in single service packaging that's freeze or shrink wrapped, if you will. And you might be a meat meal or a side dish, a vegetable or fruit. So we got main dishes, side dishes, desserts, everything you might imagine. And you just inject it with either hot or ambient water. Wait 10 minutes typically or so, it rehydrates, and then you can cut it open with a pair of scissors. It sticks to the packaging if it's wet, so you usually don't have too much trouble with it flying around in the weightless environment. But you have to be kind of careful with a spoon. You can eat it. We have other food that is, it was designed for the U.S. military. It's called Military Meals Ready to Eat. And they're just in a package, and you might warm up in the package, cut it open, and it's ready to eat. Also, entrees, side dishes, desserts. a wide variety. The food lab in Houston is always developing new food, which is very important. I've been asked before, what is my favorite food up there? Well, you can take your favorite food. If you have too much of it, you get sick of it. But there are some favorites, and usually those are favorites on the ground, but also things that you don't get very often up there. One of the things you don't get very often up there is fresh fruit or fresh vegetables. Every time a supply ship comes up, which typically averages every few weeks, one of the last things loaded on the supplies by the team on the ground might be fresh apples or oranges, grapefruit, onions, even garlic. And that's a special treat because we don't get that very often up there.
Okay, the next question is very interesting. In space, what is day and what is night? And actually, what is your schedule like? When do you wake up? When do you sleep?
Yeah, well, most of us on the ground live a routine where we're awake during daylight hours. And maybe the sun helps wake us up in the morning. And when it gets dark in the evening, our body naturally senses that. And it's, for most of us, our routine is it's time for sleep. And we go to sleep, so we sleep at night. We're up during the day. We're orbiting the Earth every 90 minutes up there. So you could see a sunrise, sunset every 90 minutes, 16 orbits a day. So you don't have that natural cue, if you will, of day-night cycle up there to keep you on your schedule. We do work a 24-hour schedule. We work on Greenwich Mean Time, which is the time in England, standard aviation time. We wake up at 6 in the morning and typically go to bed. Our sleep period starts at 10 at night. We work a long day. We have a conference starting about 7 or 7:15 in the morning with the mission control centers around the world, and then have a closing conference with them about 7 in the evening. So it's about a 12-hour workday that we're scheduled to do all the stuff we do. But you don't have a natural sense of time. So you learn that you have to work on a schedule. And the ground team in mission control, they work the schedule in great detail. So by the minute, and we have our schedule up on computer screens that are networked on laptop computers throughout the space station. So you're just referencing your watch all day long. Okay, what do I do next, and what time do I have to do it, and you work off time.
Great. So the next questions concern every one of us, right? If you're an aspiration to become an astronaut, the question is, what's the most difficult thing you need to learn? If the most difficult thing that you need to learn, they can do it, then they become can become astronauts.
Boy, there's lots of ways I can answer that question. Obviously, if you look at the historic astronaut corps and the current astronaut corps, there's lots of different backgrounds represented. So I would never tell a crowd of young people, hey, you all have to be military pilots, or you all have to be medical doctors, or you all have to be engineers. You know where your interests are and where your passions might grow into and what your opportunities for education are. So I always encourage everybody to pursue how you are uniquely gifted and equipped and have opportunity. And all of those paths give you the potential maybe to eventually be an astronaut or work in the space field or work in other fields. But to be an astronaut, one of the most important things that is required and that we look for when among applicants is the ability to work without regard for yourself and well on a team, to be a team environment, to be a positive contribution to a small group of people that work with a larger group of people to accomplish a common goal and mission. That's very important. So interpersonal relationships, the sense of teamwork, the sense of selflessness, the sense of giving yourself for those around you for a common and greater purpose. That's very important, I think, for a safe and successful mission in space.
Okay. A personal question. Is the Earth flat?
One time I got that question, I said, actually, it is. Obviously, it was a joke. I have no idea where that thought even comes from. I was not aware of it until the latter part of my flight in 2016. I started getting feedback in social media. And at first I heard about this flat earth thing, and I thought it was a joke. I thought it was satire. But it turns out that there are people in the world nowadays that believe the earth is flat. And I used to try to engage in a logical argument as to why that did not make any sense. But I quickly realized that you could not intelligently, logically engage in the discussion. So my answer has gotten to one that's very simple. I just say utter foolishness.
Okay. So the more serious question: have you encountered an alien?
You know, a few years ago, I had a friend come to me and said, "Jeff, I saw you on a documentary, and you were on the space station in the window watching a UFO." And I said, "Really?" So they got me a link to the clip of this, and sure enough, there I was on the space station looking out the window, and the commentary for the documentary was telling, "Yeah, there he is, looking out the window, watching a UFO." And you always tie aliens to UFOs, right? They made it up. They made it up. They just took some footage that was available and they made up the story. No, I've never seen any. They don't exist. But people around the world love to believe they do. And they love to believe in conspiracies. The same conspiracy says we never landed on the moon. The same conspiracy might say we've never sent anybody to space. Anna Marie likes to say if she ever found out that all this time that I spent up there, if she found out that it was on a stage in Hollywood, I would be in big trouble.
Okay, I think maybe a very heavenly encounter. Chloe over there asks, have you encountered a shooting star or a comet, and what's the experience like?
Yeah, it's amazing. Of course, that's one on a long list of encounters. I mentioned earlier that everybody loves to study the Earth. I, in particular, loved to study the Earth and see the different phenomena on the Earth. We have seen comets from up there. I personally did not see one while I was there, just with the timing of my stays. But it was a fascinating view for those that got the opportunity. But just seeing the details, I show in some presentations, I show a picture of what's called noctilucent clouds, which are very mysterious phenomena, typically over the North Pole or the South Pole, depending upon the season. But very beautiful patterns of what we believe are ice crystals in the upper parts of the atmosphere that form these patterns just due to the airflow in the upper part of the atmosphere. So that's one example. Lightning storms, to see them from above and have lightning ripple across thousands of kilometers is absolutely incredible. Here's something man-made. When you are in orbit, you're viewing the Earth, and you know a space shuttle or another spacecraft is approaching you. When you first glance, you first get a glimpse of a space shuttle on the horizon as a small dot, and then you watch it come closer and closer and closer until it's right, just a couple 100 feet away. And then you see another crew looking out the window at you. That's a pretty powerful moment too, because you know your friends, you know who they are, they're your friends, they just launched from Earth and they're coming to join you for a visit on the space station. So there's many, many things that are just very, very powerful, have an impact. Looking into deep space and seeing the star field with the Milky Way in the background and seeing the enormity of the number of stars and the brilliance of the star field. Just, it's all incredible. The northern lights, the aurora, or southern lights, aurora over the poles. One of the most mysterious things that you can see and watch.
Yeah, I saw the northern light too, from Finland, not from space. All right, so we do have a chance to see the northern light. Now, very interesting questions. How do you shower in space?
We don't.
6 months?
6 months. No, I mean, you can imagine in a waveless environment, a shower is very impractical because the water would be flying everywhere. It's hard to contain. But it's actually very simple to stay clean. We just use a washcloth with some water, and we've developed some rinseless soap. The residue of the soap just evaporates off your skin, so it's very easy to stay clean with the equivalent of a sponge bath. And you clean up every day after a workout, it's actually a very clean environment.
All right, let's move a little bit further from Moon to Mars, right? So let's say the Mars mission. So there's the ISS, International Space Station, that's circulating Earth. Will there be something circulating Moon and then evolve to Mars?
Yeah, that's the vision. In fact, the part of the Moon Artemis program is called Gateway, and Gateway is going to be that small space station that's orbiting the moon. And the reason we named it Gateway is because it will develop the operational capability to stage things in lunar orbit. It takes a lot of energy to get off the planet. It takes a lot of energy to get to the space station. It takes a lot more energy to get out to the moon. But by the time you get to the moon and you're in orbit around the moon, most of the energy required to get something to Mars has already been spent. So if we can collect up an infrastructure in the lunar system, if you will, that then can be used to send to Mars, that's a very relatively efficient way to do so. Not to mention just developing the capability to operate away from Earth in the lunar field. Just to learning that operation, especially in an international context, will help equip us to go to Mars. There's still a lot to do, a lot of work to do before we're ever ready to do that, and a lot of that work will be accomplished in the Artemis program on the moon. But there's still other technologies that are being worked on. One of them, not the least of which, is the propulsion system to get us to Mars, because we want to get there as quickly as possible. But at the minimum, it'll take several months to get there. Once you leave the Earth-Moon system heading to Mars, if you have an abort, in other words, if you have a failure that says, okay, we have to abort the mission and go back to Earth, it still is going to take an orbit around the sun to re-rendezvous with the Earth. So it's a long abort. So you have to have the capability to make sure that keep the crew alive and sustain them even in an aborted mission to return to Earth. The other big challenge for us is radiation protection. The radiation in the International Space Station is elevated over what we experience on the surface, but it's very manageable. We don't worry too much about it. Even going to the moon, it's more radiation, but it's manageable, especially for a relatively short stay. But we're protected from deep space radiation primarily by the magnetic field of the Earth. But once we get well beyond the moon, we don't have that protection anymore, and the heavy metal or heavy particle gamma ray and other radiation spectrums that come from deep space are a particular hazard that we have to protect those crews from.
Okay, good. So for people who are interested in space tourism, they want to ask a question very simple. Is space tourist an astronaut? How do you really define an astronaut?
Well, astronaut, actually the Russians call their equivalent cosmonauts. Cosmos is space, and it's space travelers, literally, and it comes from old languages. Astronauts are star travelers. Stars are really out of our reach, so their name is technically more accurate, space travelers, but it's from Latin, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think, yeah. So space travelers,
Okay.
aquanauts, water travelers.
Yeah, so talk about space tourists, right? So there are a couple of so-called private companies that launch people into space and come back out. How far is space that you define as space rather than part of Earth?
Well, there's a couple of definitions out there in the different communities, but and it's on the order of, I want to say, actually, I can't remember the exact number, but it's on the order of 100 kilometers. Or maybe,
Kilometers, the
is it
common
the-
line.
huh?
The common line.
What's the
Common.
common?
The common line,
Yeah.
yes. So there is a definition of 100 kilometer from the surface of the Earth.
Yeah, no, that's just, it's sort of an artificial boundary too, because as you go up, there's still molecular oxygen, even at the elevation that we fly at the International Space Station. So there's no hard boundary, if you will, from where you're out of the atmosphere. It's a decreasing density as you go up. In fact, even at the altitude of the space station, 400 kilometers, there's a finite amount of molecular oxygen, which causes a finite amount of drag. So it's continually slowing down, and we have to periodically reboost it back into the orbit to make sure it doesn't degrade.
I think I understand that NASA originally defined beyond certain, slightly lower than common line, they are defined as astronauts. That's by distance. But since they are space tourists, they are not going to recognize as astronaut. They said they must perform a scientific experiment. So you have to consider, if you want to be a space tourist in the future, go and design some scientific experiments, else you don't qualify as an astronaut. Okay? All right, so maybe, let's see, 11:29, maybe the last word from you, sitting on top of a rocket, how does it feel?
I get that question. You know, when I've been to many launches where I'm supporting the families of another crew going, I'm not going, or I'm supporting it technically, operationally, in some way. And I have to admit that I'm a little bit tense when I'm watching my friends getting ready to launch. I'm a little bit focused. You know, I know the risks, and so I have a little bit of an emotional response. But I have to say, when I was on the rocket, I was very relaxed, and my crewmates tend to be very relaxed. I don't know why that is, but for every launch countdown, I even took a nap. We would strap into the seats about 2.5 hours before launch. We would do some initial checkouts. After the hatch was closed, we'd do a pressure check. We'd do communication checks. We'd check out the systems, make sure we're all ready to go. And then we had some time to do nothing. You know, at least more than an hour, and I would take a nap. I was very relaxed, and then you start getting focused again about 30 minutes before liftoff, and you're focused. You know the tasks that you have to do. You know what you have to pay attention to. You're not nervous. You're just focused on doing the job, and then you're off and running at liftoff. It doesn't mean that there's not adrenaline flowing, but it's more of an excitement. It's not a nervousness. Mm-hmm. It's not that type. It's all positive.
So thank you very much. Maybe you want to give him a round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you. And for those of you that are online, we have a very enthusiastic in-person audience here as well.
There are 3 other questions.
A big thank you again to Mr. Williams and Prof. Neil for the wonderful opportunity we have had at YI this morning. Thank you, and we hope to see you again. May we now invite guests, school leaders, and teachers to take their leave.